Hello everyone. Today I will be presenting our group project on Ivan Pavlov and classical conditioning to state-dependent learning by Jamie Blackmon, Cody Fuller, Emilee Huffman, and Abigail Winland. Who was Ivan Pavlov? He was born in Russia in 1849. He is the oldest of 11 children in his family. In his early life, he was going to follow in his father's footsteps of being a priest, but quickly decided that he had more of an interest in science once he learned of the origin of species and the reflexes of the brain. A little bit on Pavlov's education. He became a physiology student at St. Petersburg University. He then went on to be a lab assistant at the Imperial Veterinary Institute. Following this for 2 years, Pavlov investigated the circulatory system for his medical dissertation. In 1878, Pavlov was asked to serve as chief of the physiology laboratory at Botkin's Clinic. In 1879, Pavlov graduated from the Military Medical Academy with a gold medal for his research. In 1883, Pavlov earned his doctorate in medicine. Following this, he studied physiology in Germany, working with Carl Ludwig. In 1890, he is made professor of pharmacology at the Military Medical Academy. And following this, he was invited to the Institute of Experimental Medicine in St. Petersburg to found and lead the Department of Physiology. Before he became known for conditioning, Pavlov did some very important work on digestion. To study digestion further, he came up with a surgical method to look at how a dog's digestive system reacts to foods. This is where he found that dogs start to drool before even seeing the food and just by hearing the person's footsteps from coming in the room. This reaction is called psychic secretion. In 1897, he published his findings in a book called The Work of the Digestive Glands. This work went on to be so important that he won a Nobel Prize in 1904. Due to the dog's response, Pavlov wanted to start experimenting by using a bell to see if dogs could learn to respond in the same way they did to the footsteps. With this, Pavlov discovered classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a type of learning where we make connections between things. Pavlov figured it out when he noticed dogs drooling just from hearing a bell because they connected the bell with food. At first, the bell didn't mean anything to the dogs, but after hearing it a few times, they did start reacting to just the bell. It shows how we can learn to respond to something new just by associating with something we already react to. If you can see here, we have a visual example of classical conditioning on the dog experiment. Now, what exactly is classical conditioning? Conditioning happens all the time, even if we don't realize it. It's a learned process where we start reacting differently to something after repeated exposure or pairing it with something else. Over time, this is what creates new habits or automatic behaviors. This suggests that a lot of what we do might be influenced by things we don't even think about. Conditioning can be sometimes referred to as learning, but that's the basic definition of conditioning. The definition of conditioning is defined as any relative permanent change in the activity that results from experience with the physical and social environment. Why is this work important? Pavlov's past classical conditioning laid the groundwork for modern learning theories. It's all about how things that happen before a behavior, such as a sound or an event, can change how we act. In his experiments, Pavlov used a tone before giving food to make dogs start salivating. Even though he didn't coin the term, he was the first one to show how environment affects behavior. He carefully added and removed different cues to figure out what was triggering the dog's responses. Now, like with anything else, there are limits of conditioning. Pavlov found that conditioning doesn't always last and it can be disrupted and fade over time. This happened when the dog learns that the signal, such as the bell, no longer leads to the food, which causes the response to stop, which is called extinction. After a break, the response could return again, which is known as spontaneous recovery. If the dog gets confused, it can become anxious or stressed. Pavlov noticed that too much confusion could even cause a nervous breakdown in dogs. This led to his later experiment on neurosis and mental stress in animals during the late 1800s. Now, to learn what classical conditioning is, the first step is to learn about conditioned reflex. A conditioned reflex is when a new reaction is learned by pairing it with something that already causes a response. It works by linking a neutral stimulus, called the conditioned stimulus, with something that naturally causes a reaction, the unconditioned stimulus. Over time, the neutral stimulus starts to cause the same reaction on its own. This is called the conditioned response. If the two things aren't paired correctly, or if the old stimulus comes before the new one, the learning won't happen. The conditioned response also can fade away over time if the connection is no longer reinforced. There are a couple of famous conditioning examples that I want to share. The first one is Marcel Proust, where he wrote a famous 7-volume novel called In the Search of Lost Time. Now, most people haven't read this, but most people know about Madeleine's movement. In the story, Proust eats a Madeleine cookie and is suddenly flooded with memories of a childhood holiday. This shows how taste or smell can trigger a strong emotion even years later. This movement became a cultural symbol of how powerful memory and conditioning can be. The next example I want to share is Watson's Little Albert experiment that showed that fear can be learned through classical conditioning. He paired a white rat with a loud noise, and eventually Albert became scared of the rat alone. This was the conditioned response. Eisnick looked deeper and asked if this kind of conditioning could lead to anxiety or neurosis. He studied the case of little Hans, a boy who developed a fear of horses after seeing a traumatic event involving a horse and a bus. Two behaviorists said the case supported conditioning, not Freud's psychoanalytic ideas. Even though Freud thought Hans' phobia had deeper meaning, it could actually be explained by classical conditioning. Here you'll see a visual of the little Albert study with the white rat, how he has no fear. And then once he gets the steel bar hit with a hammer, he is afraid, and then he is therefore afraid of the rat. Next, we're going to talk about operant conditioning. Pavlov believed that learning happens when two things, such as a sound and food, are linked or associated closely in time. The subject doesn't need a reward at first, they just learn by connecting one thing to another. However, when the reward is given, like a treat or praise, the subject becomes more likely to repeat the behavior. This is called reinforcement. While association is important, rewards help strengthen the behavior and make learning stick. You'll see this visual example of the mouse receiving food, and it rewards the behavior, and then punishment decreases the behavior. Now, how does operant and classical conditioning work in everyday life? Many of our emotions and reactions come from classical conditioning, even if we don't realize it. These emotional reactions are linked to things that we've forgotten. A lot of this happens before we can even talk, and is part of how we respond to the world. One part people talk about is conditioning and hypnosis. There's different theories of how hypnosis came about and what it is. For example, some people thought that it was magic, some thought it was a strong imagination, and others believed it worked when you focused really hard. Pavlov's followers said it's a learned reaction, like his bell with the dog with the bell. Today, hypnosis is seen as a way we learn and respond, like classical conditioning. Next, we're going to talk about the state-dependent theory of mind and body. Researchers like Pavlov and Skinner didn't realize that stress and hormones affect how we learn. Learning and memory can be tied to emotional or mental states, which is called state-dependent learning. For example, PTSD is when a traumatic experience happens and it affects you later on in life. We remember things better when we're in the same place or emotional state as when we learn them. Context-dependent memory is triggered by things like location, smell, or sound. State-dependent memory is tied to mood or physical conditions such as being happy or sad or tired. Senses like taste and smell can also bring back powerful memories. Now, state-dependent memory is no novelty. Humans have used state-dependent memory in rituals and traditions for a long time. Our emotions or physical state affect how we think and remember. This is seen in everyday moments. We tend to like people, places, or things that we connect with good memories or goals we achieved. Now let's think about it. If our behavior is shaped by conditioning in our past states, do we have free will? Life isn't perfect. The unexpected moments push us to think differently and break free from our routines. Of course, unless there are treats involved. Thank you.